Tonight, oil prices heading for a record. Gasoline higher by the day. What's driving up petroleum prices and how high will they go? Crushed by medical bills, she's filing for bankruptcy. We'll tell you why that may soon be a lot harder to do. A new link is found between secondhand smoke and cancer. This time, breast cancer. And from a reporter's notebook, reunited, a woman almost killed on 9/11 and the brave men who saved her life.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Wall Street took a big tumble today and rising oil and gasoline prices are getting the blame. The fear is higher energy prices may soon start hurting the overall economy. The Dow Industrials lost 107 points today, the NASDAQ 12. So what's driving oil and gasoline prices ever higher? CBS News business correspondent Anthony Mason has some answers tonight.
In the trading pits, oil frantically flirted again with an all-time high today. The closing price of nearly $55 a barrel is almost 60% higher than a year ago.
If you think that we're ever going to get back to the days of cheap oil, forget about it. Those days are long gone.
And crude prices are the key ingredient in gas prices. Across the country, a gallon of regular is averaging $2 again, up 26 cents from this time last year. But OPEC leaders say it's not their fault. It's a shortage of U.S. refining capacity.
We can ship you all the crude oil you want, but if you can't refine it, it's not going to translate into lower gasoline prices.
You hate to agree with an OPEC official, but he's right. That's part of the problem. We haven't built a new refinery in this country for 25 years.
And our thirst for oil seems insatiable. Americans alone are now using 21 million barrels a day. And in the exploding economies of China and India, demand is surging even faster than economists predicted.
Do we have the supply to keep up with it?
That gap is tight, and it's tightening.
John Kingston, Platts chief oil analyst, says the world's oil supplies are growing, but the thirst for crude is growing faster.
If this demand continues to grow, what happens to the price of oil?
You go from 98% of capacity to 99 to 99.5% of capacity. You simply get greater competition for that last barrel, and that will tend to drive the price higher.
Just how high is the question? Analysts say there's no roadmap for where they could be headed, because in the past, oil price spikes have usually been caused by some tightening in supply. This time, it's all about a demand that won't dry up. So analysts say we're in for a new era for oil prices, and Dan, this is uncharted territory.
Anthony Mason, thanks. It could soon be a lot harder for Americans to use personal bankruptcy to avoid paying debts. The Senate is expected to approve major changes in the bankruptcy laws tomorrow, with final approval in the House in a matter of days. CBS's Thalia Ashuris reports how this would affect you, the consumer, and why banks and credit card companies are all for it.
Zorea Marrero is an epileptic. A single mother of 3 with one child suffering from spina bifida, she faces a mountain of bills.
I've already lost my home. I've already lost my job. My children and I know what it is to go without eating.
So now Marrero is filing for personal bankruptcy, one of the 1.5 million Americans who do that every year. Her debt, up to $100,000.
So you basically are bankrupt because of medical costs?
Yes. That is my biggest bill. That is the reason why I'm filing.
That's the cause of half of all personal bankruptcies.
And I could do this on my own if I can just start new.
The bankruptcy bill would make it a lot harder to wipe the slate clean. Anyone earning over their state's median income would be forced into a debt repayment plan. And while people like Marrero, who earn less than the median, could still erase their debt, several requirements, including mandatory debt counseling and more legal paperwork, would make it much tougher to file in the first place. The credit card and banking industry argues the bill would force those who can to pay up, while also cracking down on abusers.
The predatory abuser is someone who, in a premeditated way, borrows as much as they possibly can, racks up as many bills as they can, knowing that at the end of the day they're planning to take bankruptcy protection.
Consumer advocates say only 10% fit into that category, and the real abusers are credit card companies.
They double the interest rates up to 30%. They add late fees. They add fees for exceeding the amount on the credit card. So this is an abusive system to start with.
There is a glaring loophole in the legislation. The wealthy could protect millions of dollars from creditors in asset protection trusts available in a handful of states.
This is the hardest it can be. I mean, how much harder can you make it?
Others, like Zoraia Marrero, may just be lucky to be filing for bankruptcy today. Thalia Assuras, CBS News, Woodbridge, Virginia.
Congress opened hearings today on President Bush's proposal for changing Social Security. Let's get a read now from CBS's John Roberts on what happened. John?
Dan, it wasn't the start that President Bush had hoped for when the head of the Government Accountability Office told Congress today that Social Security does not face an immediate crisis. He did agree that there are growing problems that should be addressed sooner rather than later, but he criticized President Bush's aggressive focus on personal accounts, saying what's really important is to make sure that the system is financially sound. Now, Republicans have conducted focus groups on Social Security fixes and found that, by and large, voters are pretty negative about everything that has been proposed so far. President Bush will kick off a 4-state tour tomorrow to try to change minds, but some Republican senators privately say personal accounts are a hard sell and that if they can't get Democrats to work with them soon, the idea is probably dead for this year. Dan?
John Roberts at the White House. Thanks, John. A forthcoming report on the worldwide threat of weapons of mass destruction reportedly criticizes the quality of U.S. intelligence on the nuclear programs in Iran and North Korea. This top-secret report is now being finalized by a special presidential commission, which is also expected to release a declassified version. A Senate committee heard testimony today on the U.S. Army's growing recruiting troubles. The Army Chief of Staff said he is personally concerned about lagging recruitment, blamed at least in part on mounting U.S. casualties in Iraq. There was at least one more today, a casualty, an American soldier killed by a roadside bomb in Baghdad. In addition, police found the bodies of dozens of Iraqis, and CBS's Kimberly Dozier reports there was a major attack on civilian contractors.
A suicide bomber tried to ram an explosive-packed garbage truck into a hotel full of Westerners today. Iraqi guards stopped him short of the target, but 30 American contractors were wounded. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's al-Qaeda offshoot claimed responsibility, calling the hotel a Jewish stronghold. Meanwhile, Iraqi police say they've found more than 40 bodies, some beheaded. One group was near the Syrian border, the second south of Baghdad. Most victims were believed to be Iraqi security, but 4 women and 2 children were among the dead. The militants again sending the message, working with the Americans can get any Iraqi and their family killed. Still, thousands of Iraqis are more brave than they are scared, defying the threat quietly.
What I care about is doing good things for my country, not telling people where I work.
This woman works inside the green zone at the U.S. Agency for International Development. So does her husband, but they avoid telling anyone. They even enter by different gates, so if yet another car bomb should hit a green zone entrance, at least one parent will survive.
You're not afraid for your safety?
I'm a human, so of course I feel afraid, but I keep telling myself this is the first time that I feel really proud for what I am doing.
Their American employers are in awe of their bravery and fear for their safety.
Sometimes they complain that we're more concerned than they are.
At least 2 foreign USAID contractors have been killed working here, but the Americans insist their Iraqi colleagues face 10 times the danger.
They're brave. My hat's off to them.
Despite numerous arrests and the public shaming of suspected insurgents on Iraqi television, the militant attacks haven't stopped. But the attacks haven't stopped ordinary Iraqis from fighting back either, by doing whatever they believe is right for Iraq. Kimberly Dozier, CBS News, Baghdad.
President Bush kept up the pressure on Syria today to get its troops out of Lebanon. But in Beirut, the Lebanese parliament said it will reinstall the pro-Syrian prime minister, who just last week was forced out of office. Some Syrian troops have begun redeploying to border areas of eastern Lebanon, leaving their former bases to Lebanese units. In this country, there's health news tonight that's both important and disturbing. CBS News medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon reports on research that indicates women can develop breast cancer from exposure to other people's cigarette smoke.
In a huge report analyzing all the latest data, California's Air Resources Board, the same people that overhauled that state's auto emission standards, concludes secondhand smoke actually causes breast cancer. The degree of risk varies widely depending on the amount of smoke exposure, but the report found women 26 to 90% more likely to get the disease if exposed. Children and younger women face the highest risk. Breast cancer advocacy groups were not surprised by the findings. An estimated 50 to 75% of breast cancers have environmental causes. Secondhand smoke, they say, is a leading villain.
This is an uncontrollable and involuntary exposure. And an involuntary exposure is something we ought to protect people from, particularly children and young girls.
But the study is controversial. Some say it proves nothing. Active smoking has never been found to cause breast cancer, making it especially hard to say that secondhand smoke does. Tobacco companies are challenging the evidence. Testimony submitted by R.J. Reynolds says it is biologically implausible to conclude that environmental tobacco smoke causes breast cancer.
The jury's still out.
Even the American Cancer Society believes the report is strong, but not bulletproof.
I suspect that the evidence is going to have to accumulate to convince the really mainstream health organizations.
Condemning and controlling secondhand smoke may be an inexact science, but breast cancer groups say this evidence is enough. They warn further study means further delay that will only cost more women their lives. Elizabeth Caledon, CBS News, New York.
In Florida, neither rain nor surgery tomorrow could keep former President Bill Clinton from an appointed round of golf for charity. He and the first President Bush stayed the course to raise money for tsunami relief. From there, Mr. Clinton heads to a New York hospital. He's having surgery to repair a complication from his recent heart bypass operation. Scientists are closely watching Mount St. Helens after the volcano in Washington state blew out a huge cloud of ash and steam last night. The plume rose to 36,000 feet. Towns as far as 125 miles away were dusted with ash. Scientists don't think this heralds any big eruption in Mount St. Helens, but they do say the steam burst took them by surprise. Coming up next year on the CBS Evening News, attacks on federal judges and their families. We'll give you a look at the impact on American justice in tonight's Inside Story. But first, CBS News honors fallen heroes. Nate Bruckenthal packed a lot of living into his short life, played sports, wrote poems, volunteered as a fireman, even tried stand-up comedy. He hoped to follow his father into police work. Killed by a terrorist bomb, he leaves a wife and a newborn daughter who will, no doubt, hear many stories about a big man with a heart to match. In Illinois, there's a new turn in the investigation of the killings of a federal judge's mother and husband. A white racist who's awaiting sentencing for plotting to kill the judge reportedly tried to pass a coded message to his followers a few months ago. This case in Chicago spotlights a growing danger to federal judges. CBS's Cynthia Bowers talked to one judge who knows this firsthand and gives you the inside story.
Morning.
Every day, federal judge Charles Bryant takes a different route to work.
In the real world, I'm at risk.
And when cases get tense,
the Honorable Charles L. Bryant presiding.
He even carries a handgun. But none of that could protect his family in 1987 when they became the target.
If I'd waited to come home at the regular time, it would have been the end.
His wife was nearly killed by poison candy that arrived in the mail just before Valentine's Day. A fingerprint on the box linked the candy to a man the judge had sentenced 7 years before.
So you would have had no expectation that he would ever come back into your life?
None whatever that he would come back in my life.
For Judge Bryant, the attack was a near miss. But just the next year, in a nearby town, a federal judge was murdered in his own backyard. And a year after that, federal judge Robert Vance was killed by a bomb delivered to his house.
I'm perfectly safe within these walls.
But you can't live inside these walls 24/7.
No, you cannot.
The intense security at federal courthouses is one level of protection, but with 700 threats a year made against federal judges, it's increasingly difficult to guarantee their safety once they're outside the courthouse doors.
You can't protect all of them 24 hours a day.
Former New York Police Commissioner Howard Safer was a U.S. Marshal when Judge Bryant's wife was poisoned. Today, he believes the Marshal's job of protecting federal judges is getting tougher.
If the judicial system in this country cannot operate without intimidation, then everything that we value in this free society is going to be in danger.
The murder of federal Judge Joan Lefkoe's husband and mother last week in Chicago is something Judge Bryant says he doesn't discuss at home. His wife is still too frightened, but he says his biggest concern is that fear will keep potential judges off the bench.
Why is it important that they not be afraid?
To be able to do the right thing. It takes courage sometimes to do the right thing.
Courage that's being tested again as the hunt for another killer continues. Cynthia Bowers, CBS News, White Plains, New York.
Pop star Michael Jackson came face to face with his accuser in court today. The young teenager who says the singer molested him took the witness stand at Jackson's trial in Santa Maria, California. Under questioning by the prosecution, the boy testified that Jackson showed him internet pornography. The boy will be back on the stand tomorrow. Health authorities in central Philippines are investigating a tragic poisoning case at an elementary school. At least 27 children died and about 100 others were sickened after eating caramel-coated snacks. The snacks were made from cassava root. That's a common food plant that can give off cyanide if not properly cooked. In Rome, Pope John Paul made a surprise appearance today at the window of his hospital room. He was wearing purple vestments for Lent, and he waved to the crowd below. Several hundred people, including school children, had come to sing to him, and they cheered when they saw him. You're watching the CBS Evening News, and up next, 9/11 revisited. She owes her life to the men of Ladder 6. How are they doing now? They'll tell you in our reporter's notebook. For the past few days, we've been looking through our reporter's notebook at some of the stories we've covered in 4 decades at CBS News. Tonight, the biggest story of all. It broke on a late summer morning 3.5 years ago.
That was a very scary time. I knew how serious our situation was.
No story over these many years. Not the Vietnam War.
This will be her last goodbye for today.
Not the assassination of one president.
And there's the president waving goodbye.
Or the fall of another. No story affected Americans as personally as 9/11. Or so profoundly changed our lives.
Oh my God!
September 11th, 2001. You will remember this day as long as you live. Among the heroes that day, and there were many,
Go to the Trade Center,
were the firefighters of New York City who raced inside the burning towers. This will go down as a kind of Pearl Harbor of terrorism. You may recall the remarkable story of the men of Ladder 6. When did you come across Josephine?
I think it was around the 18th or 19th floor. I think it was at that point that we promised her that we would get her out of the building, but we needed a little bit of help from her.
Josephine Harris had survived the flames and smoke in the North Tower. Do you think you could have made it down below without the help of these men?
No, I wouldn't have made it.
Josephine needed to rest a moment. It was a delay that saved them. By luck or fate, as the tower crashed down, where they stood was the only part of the entire structure that did not give. At that point, did you think you were finished?
Yeah. I sat there and I thought of my wife and the kids.
That's Mike Meldrum walking out. The destruction that took the lives of 343 firefighters did not take one of the men of Ladder 6.
There's no way to explain how we walked out of there.
There isn't a day that goes by that you don't think about what happened on September 11th.
Jay Jonas now is a battalion chief. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
He's got good days and bad days.
The worst of it is when you reflect back on some of the guys that you knew personally that were lost.
Only one of that squad is still at the Chinatown firehouse. Sal D'Agostino is there. Billy Butler and Matt Komorowski were promoted, now lieutenants. Tommy retired, and Mike Meldrum is on light duty, still recovering from 9/11.
Mike has good days and bad days, same as I do, same as everybody else does, you know, so it's going to be a struggle, you know, for all of us, probably for the rest of our lives.
As the weeks and months passed, the anger and pain began to ease. But we will never forget.
In the immediate wake of 9/11, and certainly here in New York City, I've never seen the city so as one.
The city is a different place than it was on September 10th. I have friends who live outside the city, and I saw them recently, and they said, well, everybody in the city seems so friendly. I think a little bit of small town came into New York City as a result of September 11th. It was such a unique experience, not only for the city, but for the country. It was a shared horror, a shared tragedy.
September 11th, 2001. We've shared a lot in the 24 years we've been meeting here each evening. And before I say goodnight this night, I need to say thank you. Thank you to the thousands of wonderful professionals at CBS News, past and present, with whom it's been my honor to work over these years. And a deeply felt thanks to all of you who have let us into your homes night after night. It has been a privilege, and one never taken lightly. Not long after I first came to the anchor chair, I briefly signed off using the word courage. I want to return to it now in a different way. To a nation still nursing a broken heart for what happened here in 2001, and especially to those who found themselves closest to the events of September 11th. To our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in dangerous places. To those who have endured the tsunami, and to all who have suffered natural disasters and who must now find the will to rebuild. To the oppressed and to those whose lot it is to struggle in financial hardship or in failing health. To my fellow journalists in places where reporting the truth means risking all. And to each of you, courage. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
Today, click on CBSNews.com. Brought to you in part by Walmart, working together with local suppliers to bring your community local goods, job opportunities, and low prices. This is CBS.